Building a game like Tetris in the browser is a perfect way to level up your front-end skills. Tetris in particular requires some interesting data structure manipulation, as well as some literal edge cases. Hi, I'm a senior front-end engineer at Amazon, and previously Meta. In this video, we'll walk through building an elegant game of Tetris using some functional programming techniques. This video is intended for the mid-level engineer, but all skill levels should see techniques they can use to produce more composable and organized code. Our version of Tetris will behave as follows. The active shape will fall at some tick rate, ever increasing as the player clears rows and thus scores points. The player can move the shape down, expediting the fall. They can also move it left and right, up until it collides with a wall or another shape. Same thing for rotation. If a rotation would produce a collision, we will prevent the rotation instead of attempting to bump the shape laterally where there might be room. The player's input will not be sampled, meaning they can input movement and rotation commands as frequently as physically possible. We will not implement gravity, meaning when a row is cleared, the above cells will fall exactly 1 unit, even if they still have a void beneath them. The active shape will always spawn at the horizontal center, just above the top boundary of the matrix. The easiest way to run the game is by running npx serve within the source folder. We can then visit localhost port 3000 in our browser. The GitHub repo is linked in the description. We can represent the shapes, or tetraminos, by a 2D array or matrix of zeros and ones in a JSON file. Here are the I and S shapes. Omitted are the J, L, O, T, and Z shapes. We can add padding around the shape such that the matrix becomes a square. This way, we can rotate a matrix without having to translate afterwards. In other words, the pivot point of rotation is the center of the square. This technique introduces a small complication to our collision detection, but more on that later. We can define the shape colors in a JSON file using CSS color strings. Here's our HTML document. We'll just render a root div, because the rest of the UI will be rendered with JavaScript. Here's the CSS for the UI. Our root div will be a full-size flex container that centers its children. The eventual canvas element will shrink to fit within the root container, therefore being responsive. We'll give the canvas element its intended dimensions with JavaScript. Let's jump right to the game loop. Our game loop will run until the game is over. On each iteration, we'll dispatch a tick event and then wait for the next frame as determined by the tick rate before continuing. As we'll see later, the tick rate increases as the player clears rows. Zooming out a bit, here's the entry point to our game. We provide the root element where we want to mount the game's UI. Then we provide the width and height dimensions in terms of cells. Finally, we provide the pixel resolution of each cell. First, we create the canvas element and append it to the root element. Then we create the store, where all of our game state will be stored and updated. Then we create our renderer. Next, we bind our store to the player controls, and bind our renderer to the store, so that when the state updates, the UI is re-rendered automatically. Finally, we kick off the game loop. Our player controls are implemented with a keyboard event listener registered on the document. The keyboard events are mapped to game-specific events and then are dispatched to the store. The player moves the active shape with the ASD keys and rotates with the left and right arrow keys. We can implement a basic store inspired by Redux. This architecture will allow us to co-locate our state and its transitions, which are done using pure functions. The store interface provides a getState method to get the current state. It provides a dispatch method to notify the store of events. The store may respond to these events by changing its state. Finally, the store provides a subscribe method so the state can be observed externally. First, let's outline a data type we'll call shape. A shape is an object that contains a few keys. It contains XY coordinates denoting the position of the shape. It contains the fill color as a CSS color string, and it contains a matrix just like those we saw in the JSON file earlier. On line 4, we define our state shape. Most of it is self-explanatory. The matrix is where we hold all of the settled cells. The cells are represented by a CSS color string, and empty spaces are represented with null. The score merely tracks how many rows the player has cleared. The reducer is a pure function that maps the current state to the new state in response to a dispatched event. We'll look at the reducer's implementation at the end, once we've built up enough context. Our renderer is a function that takes the state and paints the UI on the canvas. First, we paint over the canvas in white. Then we draw every solid cell in the active shapes matrix. Then we draw every cell in the game matrix. Finally, we draw the score text and the game over text if the game is over. The cell rendering is abstracted into its own function. Our render cell function takes a global x and y coordinate, as well as a fill color. First, we compute the cell's 4 edge locations by scaling the x and y coordinate by our unit size. The unit is the resolution parameter provided to our top-level init function. We then paint a square at the top left position of size unit. To simulate 2 light sources, we paint a slightly dark triangle on the bottom right and another on the bottom left. Each triangle simulates the shadow of a would-be light source. Each triangle is slightly tinted, one warm and one cold, to give the cell a faint metallic reflection quality. These fake shadows are composited using the multiply blending mode. After we've painted the shadows, we make sure to reset the blending mode back to source over for subsequent paints. Here we render the score in the top right corner. When the game is over, we blanket the screen with a faint white rectangle and render the game over text in the center. We'll need a few util functions to help us along the way. First, let's build a function composition helper called pipe that you may recognize from the FPTS library. This pipe function will allow us to pipe a value through a series of functions. We'll use it a bunch later. To facilitate our game loop using async await, let's create a util function called nextFrame that returns a promise which resolves after the supplied timeout elapses. We need to pick randomly from an array for a few purposes. For instance, when we spawn in a new shape, we want the shape and color to be random. Here's our function to get a random fill color. Here's our function to get a random shape matrix. Here's a util function to create a new matrix of the provided width and height. First, we initialize an array representing the matrix's y-axis of length height. This array is sparse initially, so we can't iterate over it. That's why we fill it with an implied undefined value. At that point, we can map over each row to produce an array of nulls of length width using the same technique. To rotate a matrix to the right, we choose an arbitrary row, the 0th row in this case, and map over it. This ensures the height of our new matrix matches the width of the old. We map each cell to its respective column in the old matrix to produce a row. This new row then needs to be reversed. Rotating a matrix to the left is very similar, except we reverse the list of rows instead of each individual row. We can randomly rotate a matrix by running the matrix through a pipeline of rotation functions. We'll compose our pipeline of between 0 and 3 rotate matrix right functions. Because we added padding to our shape matrices, we need to determine their true bounding box in order to detect collisions. We'll look for the leftmost and topmost truthy cell and track its coordinates. We'll also look for the rightmost and bottommost truthy cell and track its coordinates. We'll return the top left point and bottom right point as a pair. Let's implement our shrink wrap shape util function. We'll get the bounds of the shapes matrix and then use the slice method to remove the padding rows and cells. And that's it for our util functions. Next, let's write some selector functions. A selector function maps the state into something more specific and useful. It abstracts away the state shape, making it easier to change the state shape later. Our has collision selector is where we implement most of our collision detection logic. First, we shrink wrap the active shape to remove any padding. Then we calculate the shape's left, right, and bottom edges. We start our collision detection by checking to see if the shape protrudes past the stage's left, right, or bottom boundary. We try and detect these collisions first because they are cheaper to compute than a collision with the other shapes. When checking for a collision with the other shapes, we short circuit early and return true whenever we find a cell that is truthy in both the active shape and the settled shape. The tricky part here is we have to translate the coordinates of each cell in the active shape into global coordinates to find the corresponding cell in the matrix. Our top-out selector returns true when the active shape protrudes out of the matrix's top boundary. We can derive the tick rate from the score in slope-intercept form. From scores 0 to 3, the tick rate is 1.5 ticks per second. From scores 4 to 7, the tick rate is 2.5 ticks per second, and so on. Now we need to create our state transitions. These transitions are implemented as pure functions, mapping the previous state to the new state. We should be careful not to mutate any objects in the previous state. We'll start with spawn. On lines 8 through 16, we're generating a new random active shape. We need to get its bounds so we can center it horizontally just above the matrix boundary. On lines 24 to 32, we're copying the old matrix into a new matrix and transferring the fill color of the previous active shape into the new matrix. When the active shape settles into the matrix, we need to clear any now full rows. We also need to increment the score with however many rows were cleared. Conceptually, when a row is removed, all cells above it need to shift down. On line 3, we filter out all empty rows from the matrix. We then reverse the cleared matrix vertically. On lines 11 through 15, we copy the cleared matrix into a new matrix. Since we copied the flipped and cleared matrix into the new matrix top to bottom, we need to reverse the new matrix vertically on line 16. To move the active shape down, we just increment its Y position. To move the active shape to the right, we just increment its X position. To move left, we decrement. We've already written a util function to rotate a matrix to the right. We can easily write the state transition function to rotate the active shape to the right. Same deal for rotating the active shape to the left. Ending the game is as simple as transitioning is game over to true. Hey, you've made it this far. We've saved the best for last, as the reducer is where all the game logic lives and our code all comes together. Our reducer is structured as a switch statement, switching on the event type. Let's step through each switch case. The first two cases, tick and move down, are functionally the same. Tick is dispatched by the game loop when the tick rate elapses. Move down is dispatched when the player moves the active shape down. In either event, the active shape should be moved down. Starting on line 5, we null check the active shape. This indicates if we're in the initial state when the game first starts, in which case we need to spawn. If not, then we pipe the state through the move down and then has collision functions. Here we're projecting the state forward to see if we would have a collision after moving down. If we would have a collision, then we check if we'd also be topping out. If so, then the game should be over, so we end it. If we would have a collision but we're not topping out, then on line 10 we should spawn. Backing up to the collision test on line 7, if we wouldn't have a collision after moving down, then we jump to line 11 where we move down and clear any full rows. Moving to line 13, here we're handling the move right event. We project the state forward by moving right and then checking for a collision. If we would have a collision, then we return the state unaltered, which is functionally a no-op. If we wouldn't have a collision, then it's safe to move right. Let's skip to line 19, where we're handling the rotate right event. Just like the move right handling, we project forward to see if we would have a collision after rotating right. If we would, then we return the current state. Otherwise, we commit to the rotate. And that's our Tetris game. Thanks for watching.